Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to All Hallows Eve. You'll have to excuse my voice, lack of a voice here today as I do the reading. I went to the UVA football game yesterday and screamed my voice out literally, as unfortunately the Cavaliers lost in quadruple overtime to the University of Miami Hurricanes. It was a good game. Would have been better if we'd have won, but hey. And I'm drinking some coffee to keep my voice, kind of my vocal cords warm while I do the reading, which is a very ironic reading, guys and girls. Listen, when I was doing my morning run a couple of days ago, I had something happen that has never happened to me in the 6 years that I've lived here on our homestead in Central Virginia. About a mile and a half up the road, a couple of dogs were not pinned in. It was well, I don't want to tell you the breeds of the dogs. They have enough of a bad reputation already anyway, and I don't want to add to it. But for a short period of time, I actually felt as if I was going to have my legs torn off. There were two of them. They had collars. They had addresses on them, so I know exactly where they live. The appropriate actions have been taken on my part to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else who might be less fortunate. I got away. I don't want to go into graphic details because this is going to be an issue for these folks. Guys, if you have dogs, if you have animals, you need to make sure that they don't have easy access to your morning friendly everyday neighborhood joggers and cyclists and walkers and children. But here's what's ironic about this. You're gonna see how ironic this event was, as I make my way to a particular part in today's story. It's October 30. We're reading from October Nights Part 2, 31 More Tales for the Halloween Season. It's a story that is a very true story. It's called The Legend of Chief Cockton, originally titled One Hell of a Bad Trip on the Res, because at first that's what I thought it was. This happened this summer when my family and I took our cross-country journey from Virginia all the way out to the Grand Canyon in Arizona. I almost told the story then. A lot of you have been waiting to hear the story. I'm going to tell it to you today. And so what I'll tell you is that the irony the other day is, well, I'll point it out when I get there. Once I had safely made my way away from these two dogs that I thought was going to rip my legs off, this story came rushing back to my mind, and I stopped again and began looking around for Chief Cockton, and you'll understand why here in just a minute. That's hot. And by the way, folks, it's been in here for about 2 hours. I'm not an all-day coffee drinker. I have 2 cups in the mornings. I always put my second cup in this Stanley travel thermos. We've had this for about 4 years. It's trigger activated. Still as hot as if it just came out of the pot. Even if I'm up in my office working, I'll do this. I'll put the first cup in the mug, the second in this. And this is so that once I'm well into my work, doing my writing, doing my editing, doing whatever, I don't have to go back downstairs. Because sometimes if I take the 3 minutes it takes to go downstairs to get the other mug and come back up, whatever ideas were in my head were gone. So by putting my second cup in this Stanley travel mug thermos, which is double walled, I have my second cup piping hot when I'm ready for it without having to take time away. So these are awesome, not just for outdoors use in cold weather like this morning, but for around the house for the way I use it. You can get these on Amazon. I will put a link in the description box below that goes to these. And again, I'm only pitching a product that I believe in because I use it. I have recently become an Amazon affiliate, so I do earn a small commission if you do purchase this from the link in my description box for my video. I did that yesterday with the watch. I was amazed that some of you actually bought watches. So I wanted to say thank you very much. You're helping me out in a big way. For years, many of the vertically challenged individuals who live under bridges have one of their most common comments has been, this guy needs a job. This guy needs a job. And I thought, why don't I finally listen to him? But I didn't want to go get a traditional job because I have problems with authority figures and coworkers who expect me to do half their work, and which I end up doing, even though I'm only paid for the work I end up doing my work and half the work of everyone around me because I typically have a stronger, more fierce work ethic than most people. And so I don't like that. That's why I don't like traditional jobs. I learned that my first year out of college. I spent 10 months working on a green chain in a lumber mill. I was paid $8.50 an hour. And for every year you were there, you got a 50-cent raise. Now, it was temporary for me, and I knew it at the time. But for that 10-month period, I noticed that I did all of my work and half the work of the man on the left and half the work of the man on my right. They were lazy. But they had been there for 3 or 4 years, so they were getting $10 an hour while I got $8.50, and I was doing 150% or 50% more work than they were. That's when I learned that traditional jobs just are not for me. So to take the great advice of the vertically challenged individuals who live under bridges and who probably, if they do work, have their coworkers doing half their work for them, I did decide to finally get a part-time job, at least as an Amazon associate. So these are awesome mugs. They're affordable. They're free delivery for Prime members, and if you're not a Prime member, I'll just go ahead and put the link to where you can get your 30-day free trial membership for Prime in the description box as well, of which I do receive a $3 bounty if you sign up. One of the perks with that is also you can schedule auto refill delivery for your coffee of choice, so you never get caught unawares waking up in the morning and finding that you're out of coffee. That's what I do. So every 3 weeks I get my coffee just automatically sent to me. I don't have to go in and reorder it because I've got it set up on auto repurchase. And another benefit of Amazon Prime. Now, with all those plugs out of the way, we're going to talk about something free. Just before I get into the reading, we're going to have the winner announced of a nice little family of skunkin' tiles. Here's Mama Skunkin' Tile, and then she's got 4 little babies that all sit on her back. This is my creation. I call it Skunkin' Tile because it's part skunk, part pumpkin, and looks like a reptile. So this is going to Teresa Kroger Neville. She also has a YouTube channel. It's called Mustard Seed Faith Grows. Many of you probably subscribe to her channel. She has submitted several stories about her haunted homestead down there in Louisiana. Recently she submitted an awesome story where her grandfather, while he was shipping out to go to World War II, thank him for his service, rest in peace, Sergeant. He was World War II generation. He's no longer with us. He met a very mysterious woman who kind of gave him a premonition of how his wartime duties would go, and it was true to a T. It was a very creepy story. You'll get to read about it in True Hauntings Volume 2, which will come out the first week in November. Teresa, that's going to be shipped to you this week. If you would like to be in part of our daily drawing to win something that I make in the wood shop, even though that's stone, submit your story of your real, true life paranormal experience to the channel here. The email address is crazylake@mail.com, crazylake@mail.com. Now, as Paul Harvey would say for the rest of the story, even though I haven't even started yet, the legend of Chief Cockton. I should have brought a tissue. A lot of vertically challenged individuals who live under bridges say that it drives them nuts when I wipe my nose with my sleeve or my hand like a 3-year-old. Hey, at least I got a job. Go buy the Stanley thermoses from the link in the description box below. Put your money where your mouth is, brah. The legend of Chief Cockton. I'd been driving for days, and tired, nay, exhausted as I was. I hadn't minded because the scenery all around us was like none I'd ever seen before. My family and I were on a long-awaited and much-anticipated trip to the Grand Canyon. We were taking the trip by truck rather, as we own a pickup, so that we could see the entire country that lay between our small homestead in central Virginia and the canyon in Arizona. We'd rushed across the eastern states to the Mississippi, and that had been my idea because my family, being from the Philippines and not having traveled extensively yet outside of our neighboring East Coast states, had never seen the American West. And I hadn't seen it in 15 years, and I was excited to get out to where I believed they would agree with me that we'd traveled to a different country based upon how differently the American West looks in comparison to the East Coast. Once we hit the plains of Kansas, they were in agreement with me, and they also agreed that it was like we were traveling to other countries. Still, each time we hit a major topographic and or geographic change, like the Rocky Mountains, once we'd gotten to Colorado, where we would camp for 4 days and 3 nights because we simply did not want to stop staring at those majestic mountains. And then again, when we hit the desert, first in Colorado, where the high desert was splattered with mountains, en route to Arizona, and then terrain that was exclusively traditional desert in Arizona. For you folks that live out west, you live in a painted picture. It is beautiful. And for my fellow East Coasters, if you've never taken a trip out west, put it on the bucket list. You have got to do it. Gosh, it's still piping hot. Got to get those mugs, folks. Arizona was one of less than half a dozen states I've never been in. And oh my God, I thought while driving through the state, I definitely saved one of the best for last. I, as were my wife and son, was totally amazed how different each unique portion of the vast desert could look every time you came to the top of a long climb on the interstate and peered down the other side. Or every time you'd spend many miles rounding a butte or boulder outcropping and then come out of the turn and to the next straight and see an entirely unique landscape ahead. I'd spent a year in the desert in Iraq, and as beautiful as the Arabian desert was, it paled in comparison to the desert of Arizona. Of course, I didn't have people trying to kill me in Arizona. At least that's what I thought. Until I had what I thought was one really bad trip on the Navajo Indian Reservation that I would soon find out was not a trip at all. Trip as in, taking a substance, not falling over or taking a vacation. So this is like a trip inside a trip. Man, it's like one of those Russian dolls, brah. Last stop for cold beer, liquor, gaming, or any other type of fun, a giant sign read when we stopped for gas on the edge of the Ute Indian Reservation just before we crossed into the Navajo Nation en route to see the canyon in 2 more days. We'd been driving so much that we decided that once reaching our campground in Tuba City, the second largest city in the Navajo Nation, and let me tell you, calling it a city is a real stretch, we would take an entire day to sit around the campground and do nothing at all except rest, and then we would visit the canyon the next day. "Look at that sign," my beautiful bride, Dearly, aka Giggly Girl, said. She picked that nickname up from some of our viewers, like you, on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Homesteading Off the Grid, because that's what she does in our videos. She giggles. And FYI, she does it all the time too when we're not making videos, like literally all the time. And I love it. "What do you think it means?" she asked, pointing at the sign. "It's clickbait," I said. "Huh?" she said. "Marketing," I said. "Look where we are." We were at a gas station, filling up the tank again. I just heard footsteps. Get my 6. We took this trip during record gas prices around the world, paying as much as $5 per gallon at the time, and this being the peak only because we decided not to go all the way to the Pacific Ocean through the People's Republic of California, because gas prices there were nearing $8 at the time of our trip. We did not want to reward the bad behavior of that state's leadership by paying a full 50% more than the states and the rest of the nation were charging. All their taxes and regulations had nothing to do with us, and we weren't going to allow them to either. "We're on the Ute Reservation," I told her, "getting ready to cross into the Navajo Nation. That sign is just the Ute people's way of getting us to spend our money here before going across the line and spending it in the next nation." "Oh," Dearly said, and then we got back on the road after filling up with gas and spent 3 more hours driving through the Navajo Nation en route to Tuba City, with me trying to explain how each native nation was very much like an independent autonomous region/nation, yet still part of the U.S. And then, sometime after reaching our destination, finding out I had been wrong about that sign. Way wrong. Almost dead wrong. "We're going to shower," Dearly said after we'd checked into our campground right behind a hotel in the center of Tuba City and had set up our tent and the rest of our camp just as it was getting dark. "Okay," I said, "I'm going to have a beer." Our campsite was really neat. It was behind a nice hotel, like I said, and it had a couple dozen RV hookup sites and half a dozen tent sites. We were tent camping, and as we had been during the whole trip, save for a couple of nights I'd driven well past dark trying to race across the eastern portion of the country to get out west. On those nights, we'd stayed in cheap motels. Conveniently, the shower house with restrooms at this campsite was right across the road from our tent. I reached into our cooler and pulled out an ice-cold Bud Light, not sponsored, cracked it open and sat back in my nylon folding chair and took a swig. Man, did it really hit the spot. After about half the can, I realized just how tired I was from having driven nearly 10 hours that day, and I decided that I'd skip a shower until after my morning run the next day and go straight to sleep with my family once they were done with their showers. This in mind, I went to the back seat of the truck and reached into my man bag and pulled out a Delta 10 vape. Whew. Stuff's potent. Judge me as you will, but all this stuff was legalized nationwide, as it should have been with the re-legalization of alcohol after Prohibition, in my humble opinion. But hey, how could the authorities have harassed so many people of color and poor whites, yes, and poor whites, and political dissidents over the past century if it had been, right? What I'll tell you is that my insomnia part of the souvenir I brought back with me from the war in Iraq, a souvenir most folks call PTSD, has never been a problem since. Anyhow, I digress. I went back to my chair and I opened the vape pen, this one being new and one that I'd bought while in Colorado, where, like in Virginia, the real thing is actually legal. And yes, you'd better believe I partook in that sticky stuff in my home state once it had become legal to do so, simply in honor of the fact that it was now legal, and to spite the absurdity that it was once illegal in my state, and for the absurdity of the fact that it still is, as of this writing, illegal in many others. But I guess those states' governments would still rather harass people than benefit from the major amounts of revenues the other states are pulling in by the armloads, like a big winner at the casinos pulling all his chips in from the center of the table by legalizing it and regulating it and taxing it. Virginia's economy is going to boom over the next decade because of this. Anyhow, I digress again. Still piping hot. Buy the little mugs from the links. Use this heavily on this trip I'm reading about right here. Kept the coffee hot all day. My point is, the pure thing had been just a little too, if not a lot, too strong. But the 0.03% amount that was put in the pens, the rest being mostly CBD oil, was just the right amount to allow me to relax enough to drift off to a peaceful sleep without waking every 2 hours to see if we were under attack. Just one of those things that, once coming home from war, you cannot turn off. A lot of you folks out there know the truth about this, and all I can say is, hey, brah, thanks for your service, okay? Thank God for CBD and THC, unless, of course, your money is tied to Big Pharma. Man, I bet those guys are taking a hit with the much lower need for their sleeping pills and anti-anxiety medications. Damn it! This story will never end if I do not stop digressing, so I promise that is the last time. Anyway, I took a big hit from my new vape pen, chased it with another swig of that ice-cold Bud Light, not sponsored, and sat back in my chair and began to relax at another level. And just as I was thinking about how nice it was going to be tomorrow, not having to drive anywhere, even though we were only about an hour away from the southern rim of the canyon, because like I've already pointed out, we had decided to put that off for another day, I detected movement from behind the shower house. I sat up and looked across the street. There was only one street light, and it was mostly burned out, so there was barely enough light to see. I was able to determine, however, that the movement my eyes had detected did not come from the shower house, but from behind it. I squinted in the dim light, and I saw what appeared to be a dark figure peeking out from around the back corner of the shower house. The figure finally stepped out to the side, and I literally said, "What the fuck?" aloud. Whoever this joker was, he or she, I didn't know yet at the time, was wearing what appeared to be a Stetson, kind of like this one. with a large feather sticking out of the band on the right side. It was wearing a long black leather trench coat, like Richie Sambora used to wear on stage back when he was playing guitar for and singing with Bon Jovi and performing Wanted Dead or Alive. But perhaps the strangest thing about the figure's appearance was that it seemed to have a long, thick tail that it dragged behind it as it walked. The figure made its way around the shower house and began crossing the street. It was coming straight toward me, and as it stepped into the dim light, I thought at first that it was wearing some sort of skeleton mask. But when it finally reached me and leaned over and into my face and exhaled breath that smelled like death, I realized it was not a mask at all. This figure, draped in its dark trench coat, wearing its feather-bearing Stetson, and now its face only inches away from mine as it leaned over me while I sat there in my chair wondering if what I was seeing was real or not, was the skeletal and spiritual remains of Chief Cockton. I know this because he would soon tell me so. "You disrespect my people," Chief Cockton said. "You shall learn your lesson, tenderfoot." "Man," I said, looking down at my vape pipe, "what the hell did they put in this thing?" "Silence!" Chief Cockton yelled, swatting the vape pen out of my hand with his, or at least the skeletal remains of what had once been his. This guy looked exactly like the American Western version of Skeletor from the old He-Man cartoon I used to watch as a kid. "You shall pay for your mistake, tenderfoot," Chief Cockton said. "Just like those who came before you, just like those who will come after." "Who are you?" I asked. "I am Chief Cockton," it said, its rancid breath still polluting my nostrils, "and I am your worst nightmare." I know that the delivery of such a line, the one about being my worst nightmare and all that, was supposed to be scary and intimidating, but I'd reached that point where the combination of the THC from the vape pen and the alcohol from the Bud Light, not sponsored, in combination made all things funny, so I actually laughed. "Cockton," I said, as in, "your cock weighs a ton?" I doubled over and nearly fell out of my chair from laughing so hard at my chemically induced sophomore joke. But Chief Cockton didn't laugh. He peered down between his legs, and that's when I realized that what I'd originally thought was a tail was no tail at all, but rather a large, red, painfully swollen, you guessed it, so there's no need to say it. Yeah. You think this is gruesome? This is not something I created in my mind. This shiznit happened, brah. Still piping hot. Been in here for over 2 hours. Got to go to the link and get the mug. Dang. "You won't be laughing tonight in your nightmares," he said, "and after disrespecting my people, you'd better leave at first light tomorrow, or you may not be able to leave at all." With that, he began slinking back across the dimly lit road, off to whatever portal awaited him so that he could step into it and return to the other side of the veil from which he'd come, and he dragged that massive, well, you-know-what, behind him as he went. He never looked back, and I never took my eyes off of him until he was completely gone. And just as he popped back around the corner of the building and out of sight, my wife and son came out the front doors of the shower house and crossed the road. "You gonna have another?" my wife asked, looking at the can of now lukewarm Bud Light, not sponsored, in my hand. "No," I said. "I've had enough. I'm ready for bed." "Okay," she said, and she and our son went inside the tent. I looked down at my vape pen, which was lying on the ground a few feet away from me. I got out of my chair and went over and picked it up, about to take another hit to ensure a wonderful night's sleep. But then, thinking about what had just happened, I said, "Fuck that," barely audible, and walked over to the trash can in front of the shower house and threw it away. I had no clue what they'd put in that thing, but obviously it was giving me one hell of a bad trip on the res. I would like to say I slept soundly that night, but I didn't. Though I did sleep. But rather than the peaceful, relaxing sleep I'd gotten used to by way of the help provided by the Delta 10, it was a type of sleep I wish I'd never known. That night, I had the single longest nightmare that I've ever had in my life, and try as I may, I could not force myself to wake up. The scene in the dream was simple. I was strung up by rope in the middle of the desert, and I was hanging face down and nude over what appeared to be a fire ant mound. My penis dangled just out of reach of the tiny little bastards who, though never reaching it, got an A in the class for their valiant efforts. And they were getting close enough and in enough numbers to hold my attention. But I was not alone in this dream, for off in the distance a dark figure walked toward me through the desert. The figure was so far away when the dream began that I could barely make it out. It looked like little more than an ant itself at first. It would take what seemed like an eternity, but which probably was a full 3 hours worth of sleeping for the figure to get close enough, though it was still a considerable distance away, for me to make out who or what it was. It was Chief Cockton. Chief Cockton, in my nightmare, still wearing his Stetson hat with the eagle feather on the side, his long leather trench coat, and dragging that very unique tail that wasn't a tail, after all, was carrying something with him, holding it in front of him with both hands. It would take what seemed like another eternity before he reached me, but in real time it was probably another 3 hours. Yes, I honestly attest to the God of your choosing as my witness that I had this 6 hours long nightmare. True story. Chief Cockton finally reached me in this horrible, never-ending nightmare, and when he did, he dropped to his knees. He looked up into my face, and though it was a dream, I could smell the death on his breath, just like when he'd approached me before I'd gone to sleep. I've never had a dream before or since in which I could actually smell anything inside the dream. He held what it was he'd been carrying before my eyes. It was a jar of Cairo syrup. "Leave," he said. "Leave today, or you will pay for the sins of your fathers." He then pulled that giant eagle feather out of his hat, and he tickled my nose with it, and this brought me out of the dream. I rose with a start, reaching up and scratching my nose, which still tickled. I was covered in sweat, and the summer temperatures had nothing to do with it. Since it was early morning, it was still cool, and there was no humidity whatsoever as we were in the dry desert of Arizona. And though I'd slept for a full 6 hours, I was not rested. My wife and son were still asleep. FYI, I'm the morning person and they are the night owls. So I did what I do every morning. I gathered my running gear, which consists of only a pair of shorts and my running shoes in the summer, and after a bit of stretching, I hit the road to go for my morning run. Despite a terrible night's sleep, the run felt great, as the morning run always does. My morning run is part of my life. It is entwined in the thread of my being. On the days I skip it, which are rare, maybe 2 days a month, I feel somewhat incomplete for the entire day. This is the time during my morning run when I usually awaken and come to life, my blood and my life energy coursing through my veins. My heartbeat is the beat of life. The endorphins released from the pleasure part of my brain is better than any buzz I can garner from any substance. The thoughts that come to me after the first couple of miles have cleared my mind, creating a blank slate, tabula rasa, are the most positive and creative thoughts I have for my day. And to give away my secret, good reader, it's where the majority of the thoughts that will evolve into short stories, novels, and content from my YouTube channel come from. Running is as important to me as is food and water and the very air that I breathe. After the first 2 miles of my run that morning, which took me to the outskirts of Tuba City and into the desert, I'd come to believe that the nightmare I'd had the night before had been just that, a nightmare. Nothing more, nothing less. And the vision I'd had of Chief Cockton just before going to bed had been brought on by whatever in the hell was in that vape pipe I'd purchased in Colorado. Just as I was digesting these thoughts and looking forward to perhaps getting a bit of writing done on this, my family's rest day on our cross-country trip, I heard a dog barking. Remember the story I told you about what happened to me 2 days ago, which is an honest-to-God true story? Okay, bring that back to mind right now as you listen to the next part of this story. I heard a dog barking. Just off to my right, a stray mongrel, a bitch in heat, came pouncing up over a sand dune, and she was coming right for me. I've been a runner for more than 35 years, and though I've been confronted by dogs many times during that span, I've only been bitten by one, and it was my fault when it happened. The dog was a pit bull, though I'm not blaming the breed. I was running a time trial that day, which is a type of run where you actually try to run your best time possible for a particular distance or course. When confronted by a dog, you do not run. If you do, the dog views it as if you are scared. You are acting like prey, and they in turn will act like the predator that they are naturally capable of being. They're actually more scavenger by nature than predator. Instead, you stop running. This is all true, folks. Register this in your mind. You stop running, face the dog, and tell it no in your boldest big boy voice. It really does work. The dog will stop chasing you and return to where it came from almost all of the time. This has always been my experience, except for the time I'd been bitten. I ran from the dog on that day that I'd been running my time trial and got bitten, not because I was scared of the dog, but because I didn't want to lose the precious seconds I knew I would lose by stopping and confronting it. The dog in turn ran after me and bit me on the left calf. I still have the scar today as a reminder. I learned my lesson all those years ago. It's been close to 30 now. So I stopped at this as this desert dog approached me. I looked in disgust as I saw blood running down her hindquarters. I wasn't back in Charlottesville, Virginia, where everyone had their dogs neutered and spayed and kept them inside a fence, most of the time invisible. Wow, the irony of this. I'm eating my words here. Of course, I'm out in the county outside of Charlottesville here. I was on the reservation where anything went, and I was about to be eaten alive by this mongrel bitch because though I stopped, she continued to come toward me, barking, growling, and writhing in heat. But then things got worse. I heard more barking, but not just from one dog, but from many. I looked to my left where the barking was coming from, and there, on top of another sand dune, stood Chief Cockton, the tail of his trench coat flapping in the desert wind. "Sicken, boys!" he screamed. And then he pointed that long, bony forefinger of his skeleton hand my way. As he did, a pack of 6 more desert dogs came bounding over the dune and running straight toward me. This pack of what appeared to be feral dogs consisted of an even mix of pit bulls, Doberman pinschers, and German shepherds. "Oh, shit," I said aloud, knowing I was getting ready to be eaten alive by a bunch of wild dogs, right then and there in the middle of the desert. Folks, every single word of this is true. I had not been that scared since I was in Iraq. Except that one time on the Isle of Capri, south of Mindanao in the Philippines. Still hot. Get the mug. The pack of 6 dogs came racing at me at lightning speed. I stood still, trying to stand my ground, but it wasn't working. They just kept coming. I knew I couldn't outrun them, and just as I thought my only hope would be to pick up something nearby, trust me, sadly, there is plenty of litter all over the reservations of our First Nations peoples, at least the ones we visited on our trip, and swing away as if my life depended on it, because it did. The bitch in heat, who'd also drawn closer to me, coming in for the kill as well, continued barking along with the other dogs. The other dogs, obviously all males, stopped immediately in their tracks just before they were close enough for me to hit them with a 4 feet long length of 2x4 I'd picked up from the side of the road. It had nails sticking out of one end, and the end I planned to at least get one good whack in on the first dog to get close enough. They looked over and saw the female, and immediately they forgot all about me and took off after her. She turned and ran back over the dune from which she'd come, and the other 6 dogs followed in hot pursuit. I looked back over to the dune from which the pack of 6 dogs had come, and there stood Chief Cockton, and now he seemed even more pissed off than before. "Leave my land, you disrespectful son of a bitch, while you still have the chance," he screamed at me. And then, as if I was watching a movie filmed with the most high-tech CGI, he turned into a swirling tunnel of sand and disappeared. I turned around and ran back to the campfire at twice the speed I'd run out, or the campsite. I got there and my wife and son were awake, and my wife was cooking eggs on our little gas stove. "Nice run, honey?" she asked, not needing to inquire as to where I'd been. She'd been with me long enough to know. "Yeah," I said. "I got a good idea while I was running." "What's that?" she asked. "Remember how we were going to use today as a rest day and then go see the canyon tomorrow?" "Yeah," she said. "I'm too excited," I said. "Why don't we go see the canyon today? I mean, it's the main reason we came out here. I guess I'm a lot more excited to see it than I've been letting on. I really want to see it today. What do you say?" "Yay!" my wife and our son screamed in unison. As it turned out, they'd wanted to do the same thing, though I can assure you it was for different reasons. Their excitement to see the canyon was genuine. Mine was not. I wanted to see the canyon and get the hell out off the reservation that day. I did not want to spend another night here, potentially, I love that word, giving Chief Cockton the opportunity for another visit. I could write an entire book on our experience at the southern rim of the Grand Canyon that day, but that's another story for another time. What I'll say briefly is that despite having seen pictures, video footage, and documentaries of the canyon for nearly 50 years, none of these things did the experience of actually being there and seeing it with my own eyes any justice. True story. It was cathartic. When I walked over to the edge and peered down into the canyon, I was at a loss for words and what felt like a loss of emotion, though I can look back now and realize it was not so much a loss of emotion as it was I was experiencing emotion I'd never felt before. It's as if all the emotions within me were pulled out and hovered in space above me. The beauty of the canyon made me an empty vessel, a blank slate, tabula rasa. And I was refilled with the emotion from the canyon itself, a mixture of energies like I'd never felt. And I wept. It truly was a cathartic experience. We spent the entire day at the canyon. We saw wild elk in the forest. It was the first time my wife and son had ever seen elk, and we got out to take pictures and video footage of these animals, keeping our distance, of course, as they were wild animals, and we chatted briefly with other tourists, not just from around the U.S., but from around the world. I had not heard as many different languages being spoken around me as I did that day since the last time I traveled internationally and was at a major airport either somewhere in Asia or Europe. On the way back to our camp, we stopped at a roadside gas station / convenience store to get some snacks and drinks. I knew I only had about 5 beers left in my cooler at the camp, and that would be enough to last a couple of days, maybe 3, as when I do drink, it's not much. At times, if it does start to become much, I nip it in the bud and won't drink at all for a while, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, and on a few occasions, years, simply because I forget to start drinking again. Seriously, that's true. I had no problem finding Gatorade and water. I do not drink soda. Trust me, unless you're an alcoholic, which I'm not, soda is far worse for you than beer. Speaking of which, I could not find this thing called beer. I made my way to the register and asked the cashier where the beer was. This is when I found out 2 things. Number 1, the sign at the Ute Nation had not been clickbait. Clickbait. And number 2, I now knew exactly why I'd pissed off Chief Cockton. There is no alcohol allowed on the reservation, sir, the beautiful Navajo lady who appeared to be in her early 20s working at the counter said. Oh shit, I said. But not because I couldn't buy beer, it was because I finally understood the meaning behind my mysterious visitor. You can head east for about an hour and get beer, sir, she said. It's not that, I said. I didn't know. I drank a beer last night at our campsite in Tuba City. The girl looked at me, her eyes wide, but she said nothing. You're not going to call the po-po on me, are you? I asked, because for a second I thought she might. No, sir, she said, and I could hear the fear in her voice. Sir, you must please respect our ways. Law enforcement is the least of your concerns if you do not. I knew exactly what she was talking about. We paid for our non-alcoholic drinks and our snacks, and we got back in the truck and headed back to our campground. We should leave tonight, I said, almost back to our campground. Are you crazy, my wife asked. She knows I'm crazy, but this was situation specific. We've seen what we came to see, I said. Why stay? It's going to be dark soon, she said, and we'd have to drive for hours before we even came to a cheap motel. Our tent site is paid for the next 2 nights anyway. We can leave tomorrow if you want to start heading back east early, but we're not leaving tonight. It'd been worth a try. The best thing I could figure out to do since we were spending one more night on the reservation was to watch my P's and Q's. No beer and no vape. Sure, this would mean probably no sleep either, but I viewed this as a good thing. I'd be able to keep an eye out for Chief Cockton if he came creeping around the tent, and I wouldn't have to worry about another nightmare. Plus, I thought maybe he wouldn't come around at all since I would not be disrespecting his people's ways. Try as I might, and despite no substance sleeping aids, just after 2 a.m. I fell asleep. And I was right back in that nightmare. Chief Cockton took the feather he'd been tickling my nose with. I mean, we picked right back up where the dream had left off the night before, and he placed it back in his hat. I didn't drink, I said, realizing I was back in the dream. Let me go, I didn't vape. Too late, he said. Oh, he's an unforgiving son of a bitch, this Chief Cockton. Came at me 2 days ago with my neighbor's dogs. I swear I was looking around for him after that. I didn't know, I said, sweat from my forehead drawn out by the sweltering desert sun dropping like rain beneath me. I watched the sweat droplets land on Chief Cockton's tail, which wasn't a tail, which was laying on top of the mound, and the ants raced to it as if they were dying of thirst, the same as I. And after drinking up each droplet of sweat, they bit as hard as they could into Chief Cockton's tail that wasn't a tail, but he didn't even as much as flinch, as if the pain meant nothing to him, as if he were used to it. And I would soon find out that he was. I didn't even know, I said. Nay, I pleaded. It was an honest mistake. Honesty is something your kind does not understand, he said, and with that he took one skeletal hand away from the jar he'd been holding with both, and he wiped it in a downward motion over my eyes, as if he were closing the eyes of a dead man. And when my eyes were closed, I saw a vision. The vision was of what had befallen Chief Cockton. This, dear reader, is the legend of Chief Cockton. Chief Cockton had a different name when he'd been alive, but as a white man, I was not entitled, irony, to the knowledge of this name. Chief Cockton had been the leader of a small sect of the Navajo people. After his people were forced to live on the reservation, they were continually harassed, ridiculed, and taken advantage of by many of the U.S. soldiers who'd been sent to make sure they didn't get uppity during the Indian Wars of the late 1800s, just after the American Civil War. One of the rules the native people were forced to live by on their new reservation was the rule of prohibition: no alcohol. Chief Cockton and his people had had no problem with this, as they'd seen firsthand how the gift of alcohol from the Great White Father and his people had ruined so many of his people in the past. It had made them apathetic, lazy, abusive, and self-destructive, just as alcohol in excess had, and still does, so many people from so many races. Frankly, Chief Cockton and his people loved the idea of keeping this poison away from their people. However, they were none too happy about the hypocrisy of the U.S. soldiers habitually drinking while stationed on the reservations. It would have been one thing had they kept to themselves, but far too many times the soldiers would tie on a good drunk and then go among the native people and have fun at their expense. One day, after the preceding night of such fun saw 3 young native women being raped, Chief Cockton had had all that he could stand, and he couldn't stand any more. He approached the officer in command and demanded that the U.S. Army forces leave the reservation. The problem was that the major that he'd approached, as well as his men, were still drunk. And they weren't still drunk from having gotten so drunk the night before. They were still drunk because they'd never stopped drinking at any point during the night before, and they were continuing to drink on this particular morning. In a word, they were shit-faced. The group of men wrestled Chief Cockton to the ground, shooting and killing the men he'd brought with him for protection. Then they dragged him out into the desert, ripped off all his clothes, and they tied him to the top of a fire ant mound. They poured Cairo syrup all over his genitals, screaming, "This is what you do to us, so this is what we'll do to you." "We had never done that to anyone," Chief Cockton said to me, now swiping his hand upwards across my eyelids, opening them again. "There were so many lies your people told your other people back east to demonize us. They would think of the worst possible way of torturing a man, and they would claim that we had done it. We had not. But then when your people came to us, they would do it to us to exact revenge for sins never committed." "I'm so sorry," I said to Chief Cockton. "I know your people got a raw deal, and you're still getting a raw deal today in so many ways." "Silence!" he screamed. And even though I was asleep and dreaming, the wretchedness of his death breath practically knocked me out to the next level of unconsciousness. "You shall pay. You shall suffer the same fate as me. There will be no forgiveness. You were given a chance to leave, but you did not take it." At this, Chief Cockton unscrewed the top of the jar he'd been holding. He lifted it up, allowing my dangling penis to become submerged in the Cairo syrup. I screamed, but it was as if he heard me not. He took the jar when he was done, put the lid back on it, and then he rose and walked around behind me. And with the knife he'd had hidden inside his leather trench coat, he cut the leather strap that had been holding up my right leg. My leg dropped, allowing my torso to now touch the fire ant mound beneath me, and oh my God, I had never in all my life felt the pain that I felt in that instant as a countless number of fire ants bit into my manhood. Son of a bitch, I screamed, sitting up. I was awake. Whew. My wife and son were sitting outside looking into the mesh door of the tent, laughing. You were having such a nightmare, my wife said. You kept grabbing your balls, my son, 11 years old, at the age at which, my son said, 11 years old, the age at which boys would be entertained by such things, said. It was like that movie Idiocracy, he said, where that idiot is watching that dumb show on television called Oh, My Balls, where the idiot would fall onto a fence post and stuff like that and grab their balls and say, Oh, my balls. And with that, my wife and son laughed even more. I looked down, pulling down my boxers, and saw that the plumbing was still intact and completely undamaged. We're getting the fuck out of here, I said. Don't talk like that in front of your son, my wife said. I'm your son too, he said to her. In the back of my mind, I could see a group of older women in West by God, Virginia, several decades before, along a beautiful country stream in the fall of the year, saying something about raising boys. Remember that story from a few days ago, the two that got away? I ignored my wife and my son and the women in my memory, and I jumped up and started packing. My wife had cooked breakfast already, but I didn't eat. I wanted to get off that reservation as quickly as I could, and within half an hour we were packed up and in the truck and heading back east. We'd driven for nearly 2 hours, and we were within sight of the reservation line, where we would soon cross back onto the Ute reservation, when out of nowhere my wife said, "Look at that," and she pointed out the passenger side window. I looked over out into the desert, and on top of a single dune, there was a tunnel cloud of sand, and in the middle of the cloud, I could see a figure, a dark figure in a Stetson hat with a feather on the side. The figure wore a long leather trench coat, and he seemed to have a long, thick, oddly shaped tail, though I knew it was not a tail. Do you see that? I asked my wife and son. Yeah, our son said. It's a dust devil. Boy, if he'd only known. No, I said, in the middle. They looked, and try as they did, they could not see Chief Cockton. But then all of a sudden, my wife yells, "Look out!" A swarm of birds came flying at us from out of the middle of the dust devil, and they came straight at our windshield, encapsulating our truck in a cloud of darkness. I could not see the road, and just before I felt as if we'd go off the road, the birds parted, and I could see the road again. And then, one single bird hit the antenna on the right side of the hood of the truck and split in half, like literally. Just like one of those plastic birds you might see in high school biology class. One half sticking to my wife's window at first, and then sliding away due to the force with which our truck was moving, and the other half sticking to the center of the windshield and remaining there due to the same aforementioned force pinning it in place. Ooh, gross, my wife said, covering her eyes. Cool, my son said from the back seat. Get it off, my wife screamed. Get it off. Not yet, I shouted. I could not stop. The Welcome to the Ute Nation sign was in sight, and I was not stopping it until I passed it. Only a moment later, I did pass the sign. I was safely on the Ute Nation's reservation. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road, and with a gallon of water, a bottle of Windex, and a roll of paper towels, I got out of the truck to clean the dead bird and its remains off the windows. But when I got out, I saw that the bird was gone. There was no blood, no gut streaks at all, no feathers. It was as if the bird had never been there. You hear this guy up here? Yeah. I looked back to the dune on the Navajo Nation side of the border, and there in all his glory stood Chief Cockton, and he screamed, "And never come back!" I looked in the truck to see if my family was acknowledging him. My wife was still holding her hands over her eyes so as not to see the yuck that was no longer there. My son in the back seat was taking advantage of his mother having her eyes covered. He'd sneaked his smartphone out of her purse and was playing a video game. Both were completely unaware of the chief, and they were unaware of the fact that the bird was never there. I got back in the truck, and as I did, they both looked up. That was quick, my wife said. Wow, you got it really clean. I know, right? I said, knowing I'd never cleaned the window or the windshield at all. I put the truck in drive, having already placed my cleaning supplies in the back seat, and we began heading down the road at a much more sane pace. "Daniel," my wife screamed at our son, "give me that phone!" And thus began the second half of our cross-country trip, the half that would eventually bring us home. I fully intend to return to the Grand Canyon someday, and I'm not opposed to staying on the Navajo Nation's reservation again. But if I do, I will obey and respect and abide by all of their laws now that I know them. And despite the terror he placed in my heart for 3 days and 2 nights in his attempts on my life with dogs and birds and in a dream with Cairo syrup and fire ants, I keep Chief Cockton and his people in my thoughts and prayers. The end. So if you're listening, Chief Cockton, there, I have told your story. I have admitted my sins. Your legend is now public. Please call off the dogs. That was so crazy and ironic that just 2 days ago, he sicked them on me again. I never saw him, but the dogs came at me. Let me test it. Still piping hot. Got to go there to the link and get one of these. Also, if you want to be considered in a drawing to win a free prize that I create myself, submit your story, your true, real experience you've had in life, or the experience that maybe is passed down by a family member to the channel. The email address is crazylake@mail.com. And sad as it might be, we've only got 1 day left until Halloween, which means we've got the feature story of October 9th, part 2, 31 more tales for the Halloween season coming up tomorrow night. Again, I'm going to preface this. A lot of folks say, hey, I heard that story, or I read your book, or blah, blah, blah. That was me in that story, wasn't it? You hear this a lot as a writer. And in the past, I've always said maybe to a small degree, yes, but to the most degree, no, you're not as important as you think you are, folks. But for the last 30 stories I've read, and we do have a playlist, look for it on our About page here on the channel, you'd better hope, you better pray you did not recognize yourself in any of those stories. Tomorrow night, on Halloween night, you're going to find out exactly why. See you then for the details. Yep, still piping hot.